It's today in EVE Online, March 27th, 2020. It's Friday, so we're going to be talking about the monthly economic report that just came out for the month of February. We're in March, obviously, but it's the totals of February and before. I'm here with Caleb. How's it going?
Hey guys.
So, okay, let's get to it. We're looking at the production versus destruction map, and we see that there isn't anything interesting there. We're in the, I don't know, would you call this the post-blackout era?
Yeah, we can call it that. The post crisis.
Yeah, this area here, which I'll just say for people who are listening to this, would be basically the summer of 2019 through January of this year. So basically, the last half of last year was a pretty big dip in, well, let's see, what is red? In production. So that makes sense that a lot of people decided not to produce things considering it was hard for them to go and harvest. And I think there was just a lot of people that were staying logged off because they couldn't harvest easily. Harvest asteroids, harvest moon minerals, or even move things around. It was very difficult to do that. So they probably went and played WoW when it was the classic WoW was relaunched, and a lot of people went to go check that out, at least people that I know. But if you look at the destruction and the stuff that's mined, it's, what am I missing here? It's
The effect is not as big as you would
yeah.
expect it, right? Especially if
Yeah.
you compare it to the dependency on the production. You would have expected them to follow a lot more, but of course, indicators and the actual values. So it's pretty much as normal right now. I think you should expect the development to continue. You might see an uptick in production again very soon when it becomes viable, because what's happening right now is that the markets and some of the stockpiles have been clearing out of the old stuff, and that means that you're seeing an increase in value. And then, because production is basically based on value, that means that, of course, even if it's the same, if the value of it goes up, you're going to see the production numbers go up, even though the actual number of units are the same. But I think both are actually going to go up because there is a depletion and people will try to actually get more stuff to market. So you might see an increase and an uptick in production numbers.
Well, I think if I'm not mistaken, blackout didn't really hurt miners that bad that were protected miners. I don't think I'm not sure if the harvesting went down that much. It did go down in June, but that was when a lot of the people who usually go mining were busy up north destroying tribute. I'm talking about the Imperium's miners. And then when they got back in July, they just completely spiked to the tune of 2 trillion ISK per month. Or is that per day? That's per day. No, I don't know what that is.
And on the ad side of any moon changes, you're also going to see a change in value of the raw materials. So that should also mean that the mining numbers should also go up. At least that's what I'm expecting, because the value will go up while the volume is actually going to remain the same. So you're going to see an uptick on that too. And then, of course, destruction numbers might actually start going up a lot, because I think the latest activities, even though they're just rumblings, they will continue, and there will most likely be some escalation bound to happen very soon.
Right. So I keep looking back at Blackout to say, like, from what we know, what we felt about Blackout, what did it actually do to the game? And it's actually kind of a mixed bag. But we are talking about now today, which is the recovery from that era, starting in January, pretty much. But we're in the third month of that, so this is the end of the first quarter, pretty much, for the post Blackout era. And it looks like things have recovered pretty well. Except mining is still way down compared to what it was since 2018. So mining is at around 1 trillion. That's not per day, is it? Is that? No, the 1 trillion mark per month, I guess. when it used to be up in the 2 trillion. So it's about 50% of what it was. That's a big change. And we attribute that to, it's even lower now than it was before. Attribute that to maybe some changes. Let's look into this MER a bit deeper, because I think we can represent that. All right, looking at the summary of key economic figures by region in 2020, in February. The one thing that stands out to me is something that's just the total trade value in JITA, in Forge, is, well, I guess it's in Forge, right? Because you're talking about the Tranquility Trading Center, but also, or Tranquility Trading Tower, but also JITA. Just way beyond everybody else.
Yeah, it's the tragic numbers. It's the numbers that I would hope to see change fairly soon. The production and the trade volume in the Forge, I would really like to see that be spread out more.
Yeah, this means that basically everybody goes to the same market. That's where it's safe to sell, safe to buy, because you'll find a buyer, you'll find a seller. But it's sad because it means people are less spread out and doing economic activity all over the place. Another thing is the production in Forge is about 2 to 3 times anybody else, including Delve. That's also sad because people are building. I imagine people are buying ingredients in JITA and then just building in station for themselves, not really selling it.
Very much.
Okay, but here's something that's interesting: is the NPC bounty hunting. You can see there's a new leader there. Delve did about 4 trillion, but OASA did 4.7 trillion. And we knew that was going to happen. I mean, we had talked about how OASA was coming on strong because they were dominating every day the top 10 systems of NPC ratting. So we knew that February was going to be a strong month for them. And they have, in fact, been the dominant ratting area, which is unusual.
Some very busy crabs down there.
Yeah, one thing I didn't expect, though, look how strong Fountain is. That's at a 2.4 trillion or something. That's an extension of the Imperium. But also as an extension of OASA, you have the Expanse, basically, the Kalevala Expanse. And that got a 1.4 trillion. So, yeah. I don't see anything. I mean, really, those are the major players in ratting. Is OASA and Delve with a couple systems next to those. Keep switching over accidentally. Net imports and net exports. Let's look at that. And that's the green and magenta area. There's definitely a story to be told here because as far as net exports, you see down in Derelict, it stands tall amongst itself with a 4.4 trillion.
Yeah, you just have to remember that that's pretty much moving troops more than anything else. It's got nothing to do with trade. It's all about what value is jumping into that region from other regions.
Exactly. So anything that enters the system is counted, whether it's brought there to be sold or passing through. It still gets counted.
What you're seeing when you're looking at import exports is basically you're seeing troop movements. So the exports is troops moving out of that area. So you can see that Delve is actually moving a lot of troops out of Delve into other areas where they most likely are used to kill other stuff. So then you see in the net imports, you will basically see where they are actually showing up. So the things that are moving from the export side are basically moving into the import side, and it's actually troops. It's not value of materials or anything like that. It's finished fleets, which is one of the issues that we ask Quant to fix and remove that, so it only counts cargo and not actual hulls.
But you can bring in a ship, package it up, and sell it, so it may not represent the sale.
That doesn't matter. Then it's an export, right? If you have a packaged ship, that's not a problem. That should be counted as an export because it's a financial thing. It's a trade, right? But if you're moving an assembled ship, it should not count.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, packaged goods rather than anything you could fly. That makes sense.
Yeah, they need to just count the hangar floors, basically. You would get a little bit of an offset by things like troops moving ammo, because it might actually count ammo as well. Because if it counts all hangar floor and ammo bay and all that stuff, but it doesn't really offset it that much. We really want to know what the actual imports exports are from area to area. That would be so much more useful, because this is also like almost perfect intel on troop movements, which is really bad for the game.
They are a month behind, but yeah. Normally spies would know stuff unless you do it near the end of the month. No, but even that, it's like a 3 weeks. I mean, we're almost finished with March and we're just looking at February. So I think people already know where troops have been moved. But it isn't a good economic indicator. It makes no sense to say that, you have a navy in deployment to a region. That's not part of the economic of that region. The war is, but not the movement of those ships. So it doesn't make sense. Okay, but anyway, the things that we can look at here are this clearly reflects Derelict being evacuated as a dead coalition becomes actually dead. So that's the biggest movement of assets out of a region. What's interesting to me, though, here you have Haymatar, which is a Minmatar Empire region. It's basically high sec or low sec. It's got a ton of imports, so I don't know what's going on there. Same with Metropolis. And same
Isn't
with
that where
Meltec.
some of those moved into, right? Isn't that the refugee camp? That's what I would have expected. Where did they move to?
I think the majority moved to Imperium or switched sides over to Fraternity, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, but have those assets are not showing up as having been moved to Delve.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, this is interesting.
There's hardly any import in Delve.
This is interesting, and maybe we're reading this wrong or this chart is wrong, but it says that net exports from Derelict. Derelict is in the south. It's not Decline. I was thinking of Decline. That's where Dead Coalition was, and that's where they have abandoned. So net exports with Derelict, to me, makes no sense. Something's wrong here. We'll try to figure it out. Okay, mining value still belongs to Delve at 2.4 trillion.
Still a massive reduction, right?
Yeah, because they were at 4, I believe, last month. It's a 50% drop. But what's interesting to me is how much the Forge, Domain, and Sync Liaison has grown in mining value. OASA actually is competing too for mining, so they're doing a bit of both. But mining was nerfed last month in nullsec, so there are some definite shortage or drops in productivity for mining. And you see, I think, an augmentation of mining value in HiSec, which is interesting to me because there were some areas in HiSec where you could mine. Okay, and finally, destruction. The Forge pretty much tops everything because that's the marketplace. So people get picked off at the marketplace, assassinated, basically. And then what's interesting to me is you have Domain competing up there with Citadel. So these are all marketplace assassinations and war decks around supply lines and that sort of thing. Delve looked like it's harassed pretty good compared to OASA. Delve has been, and you don't know if this is them getting destroyed or if this is them destroying people who come to harass them. So it's just destruction on both sides. So everything's counted. So this doesn't mean they're winning or losing, but there's twice as much destructive activity in Delve as there is in OASA among players. So that's interesting. Okay, let's go deeper into this. The total destruction by region. We kind of covered this, that the Forge, Citadel, Domain, Lone Trek, these are all trade hub routes, and so not only will people get ganked and shipping ships get destroyed for their cargo in these areas, but you also see that's where war declarations, basically legal assassinations or sanctioned assassinations by the government, will happen because they're around supply lines.
It doesn't help when someone moves almost $500 billion and gets ganked, right?
Oh, that's right. We had a loss of an orca, actually. And an orca had a tremendous amount of blueprints, which were invaluable, and a player lost that. I think it was a Citadel, actually, because it was in one of the major choke points in the Citadel on the way to the market or between markets. So yeah,
it was Uedama.
Yodama, yeah, that's the system. Okay, looking at Delve, right behind Delve is Venal, where we saw a lot of combat last month. That's the Northern War. So destruction still around 1.8 trillion in Delve, but in Venal it was about 1.5 trillion, which is not that far behind. Okay, anything else on destruction?
Not really.
Yeah, me either. These graphs I never get a lot of because most of it is we're looking at total destruction by region, and I'll just skip this.
And there's always the shadow number of wormholes that you don't actually get anywhere. So
right. Okay, this is total mining value of region. Taking a closer look now, Delve at 2.4 trillion. They were at like 4.1 trillion, so that is about a 50% loss. But this is what gets me, and this is where I think there's some interest. I would like to know more about why this is happening. But Domain is a high sec area. If you mine there, you're gonna mine at a slower rate. So why did they get second place with a 1.7 trillion?
Isn't that because a lot of the casual miners that didn't want to mine in Null anymore, they pretty much moved to that region primarily? I'm not going to claim that they're bots or anything, but many of the people that at least have many accounts of orcas and stuff might actually have moved there. That would be my guess.
Yeah, there was some talk about, I don't know if they were conduits or some NPC area where you could, once you cleared out the enemies, you could mine unfettered and you would get those big asteroids. So you were essentially doing nullsec mining in highsec, and maybe people were taking advantage of those. We probably need Ashtarothi to give us more information on those. But I don't know if that I think they might have changed that, but I don't know how many weeks that was active. They might have changed it by the end of February. Okay, but that's interesting to me because you have Delve in number one, and then you have Domain, which comes out of nowhere to me, and then you have OASA, which makes sense. That's where Fraternity's been doing a lot of their ratting and mining, and they're at 1.4 trillion for OASA. So
in general, that's the story about OASA, right? That's the story of this month, right? There's a lot of activity going on there, a lot of crabbing, both on the mining and the NPC ratting and all that stuff. It's really an active region.
Yeah, Anton says, I live in that region. It's very spread out and lots of space to go. Domain, it's a good point. Domain is one of the biggest regions in the game. It's the home region for the Amarian Empire. Okay, NPC bounties. This is the big story for this month, and you can see that OASA edges out Delve for first place at about a 6.7 trillion in NPC bounties collected. Delve comes in at a little over 6 billion.
It's kind of a catch-up thing, right? Yeah. It feels like they're trying to really just grind like crazy to catch up with the Imperium number.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's untrue. I think that they're still, the game mechanics as they are, there's still a desire to be as rich as possible, to get into T1 super capitals as quickly as possible with as many accounts as possible, because that super cap umbrella, that super cap presence is still the hammer in EVE Online. So The more people you can get into those big ships, the more power your alliance will have.
But the interesting number, really, in this case, is how big is the population, right? How many people are actually generating this activity? This is back to what we were talking about, at least on Push to Talk, when we're doing the analysis and crunching numbers, where we were trying to point out that the goons are not necessarily always winning the crabbing war. A while back, Darkness was actually winning the ISK war on crabbing when it came to NPC stuff, right? Because they were pretty much printing money left, right, and center. And per capita, they were outperforming goons by several magnitudes.
Well, not several magnitudes, but they were definitely winning, or they were a close second, actually. But the point was that they were the nearest competitors by far. And so what did...
They were winning.
Were
per
they
capita, they were winning.
Per capita?
Per capita,
okay.
if you looked at real warm hands and crunched the numbers, that was what Eric was insisting that we do. And yes, they actually did much better than the Imperial. I think it was something like 30 or 40% higher in actual numbers, which I think is quite a lot. It's the mining stuff that they couldn't really keep up with because they don't have that much resources, and I don't think they have that much mining crew or the whole behavior with when it comes to crabbing with mining equipment. That's pretty much still Delve, as the numbers show. But OASA is getting up there, I think.
Well, yeah, and here they took the lead, at least for this month. I don't know. The Delve got very competitive on the second half of the month, so I think March is going to be interesting to see which of those two powers has the most amount of ISK generation capability, Delve or OASA, basically the Imperium or Fraternity. Fraternity is big and active and organized, and we've heard from people that attacking OASA is no joke. They are very organized in their defense, so they may be outplaying Delve at their own game at this moment, and we'll see if that continues in March.
Yeah, well, it's a catch-up game, right? Because they do have to catch up with the stored wealth of the Imperium. And looking at these numbers, they're doing pretty good. I don't know how long it would theoretically take them to call it catch up with someone like Goons, because of course the Imperium is more than just Delve, and organization-wise, it's way more complicated. But I do think that this looks like a very interesting development, and it's definitely going to be something that they're going to start utilizing at some point, right? They're not just going to crab for no apparent reason. At least I hope they aren't.
Well, there's a couple things at work here. One is you're right. You don't count just the Goon Swarm and Fraternity. You count their allies as well. And at what point do you count Fraternity's allies? Where do you stop? Is it just other Chinese groups like MSN or Triple V that are a part of Fraternity? Or is Pandemic Legion, Horde, NC Dot, are those considered allies of Fraternity as well? Because if that whole block is trying to catch up, they have enough people to match the Imperium's massive arsenal. Another thing that we should look at is the Imperium has been at this for a while now, so they may have already achieved, as per capita, what they needed to. In other words, every pilot has 2 or 3 alts that have Titans, which is crazy if you think about it, but they may already have achieved that, whereas the other groups are catching up to that.
Yeah, we know the anecdotal stories of many FCs that pretty much have like 2 or 3 Titans and maybe 1 or 2 spares, and then they also might have a cache somewhere that they forgot. It's like these people are already quite well off, right? And that's the catch-up game.
So we'll see how that continues. But it does look like at least for the second half of the month, Delve woke up and started ratting like crazy. All right, let's move on. All right, this is interesting. The total production value by region. It still makes me sad that everything's produced in Forge because that's where the market is. That's also where the higher taxes are. So we we really want more texture than that. We don't want one single trade hub. We want multiple trade hubs. We want trade hubs with different personalities, just to give the game more texture.
This is where we can almost hear the voice of Retati saying, "Watch this space."
Yeah, we think some of the changes that they have in mind will help promote more diversity in places to go when you need to buy a thing.
Because we are bound to get an industry update, things that they wanted to do with industry. We know the CSM has actually talked about it at the summit quite a lot. Of course, they can't say exactly what was being presented, but from what I feel they are looking at, it could be a huge thing, maybe even bigger than the mineral changes.
Right. So they've made mineral adjustments. That was reflected in this report. But what is not reflected in this report is what happened at the beginning of this month, which was a change to the market and the way that the pricing works on it. So if you see the market cool down in JITA, will that change where people produce things for the market? Will people move to a more regionalized market system as opposed to a more centralized market system because trading changes have been made? How much the fees are to make adjustments to your buys and sells?
Well, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but for now, there's really not much change in what the market has been doing since the market changes. The changes that we're seeing in the market are primarily based on the other scarcity issues, the nerfing of resources. So we still have to wait for the actual impact, and it would need something like industry changes for all of it to start moving and shifting. But then it becomes potentially viable to move some of your production outside of the forge and then just ship it in as needed. And you might also want to choose to move it to another hub. We can expect to see secondary and tertiary hubs develop from this because that would be viable because JITA is not going to be king.
We'll see.
They're still going to be king for retail, but it makes sense to move your stuff out elsewhere as well.
Yeah, again, we're looking at a chart that says this is what's being produced, not necessarily what's sold. So the strongest player-controlled area is Delve, pretty much by far. And that's over 12 trillion in production. So they're still producing like crazy. And remember, they have a giant surplus of minerals that they've mined over the last 2 years. So they may not be hurt by their harvesting numbers being half of what they were before. Not for a while anyway. Those shortages won't hit for a while. But let's look at these other areas. And instead of just looking at the top part of the chart, let's go to the middle and what kinds of places.
Just a very small comment to that, which I think is rather relevant. The reason that you're seeing this is because even Delve or any null will move in raw materials and then actually build in the forge. They will not necessarily or hardly ever build the finished product in Delve because it's just not necessarily worth it. It's more effective to actually move it because logistically it's almost impossible to move things like hulls from null into high sec. And this is basically because one of the ships that were supposed to do that, in my opinion, are completely broken because they can't really contain enough value to be worth actually moving hulls that are finished.
Are you talking about the freighter that could move ships?
Yeah.
What's that freighter called? Bulwark?
Yeah, Bulwark.
Bulwark, yeah. Anyway, there's a freighter that can move ships that are already assembled. No other freighter can do that. There's a question from the audience from Anthoron. Does the production include reactions? And it's bowhead. That's what it was. Bowhead.
Yeah, bowhead. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that it does include reactions and any refinement of raw material. So many of the industrial activity that you're seeing in Delve is most likely just that, refining up to the point where they then ship it out.
So I wanted to look at the middle of the chart next to see like what other regions are, because this chart is distorted by the Forge and Delve and even Citadel and Lone Trek. And let's put OASA in that group now too, because they're competing with those groups. Those are massive, massive build areas, but I wanted to look in the middle to see what other areas that you wouldn't think of produce a lot. So one thing that surprised me is Veil of the Silent is coming in at about 3.8 trillion, which is a lot, but that might be faction war related. I'm not sure. Another area is Sync Liaison is starting to that's also a trade area, but it's not been known as a strong trade area until recently. I think we'll see that later on. But for them to be doing nearly 4 trillion in building, that's pretty, I think that's new. Other areas that I like that people may not go to a lot is Placid. Well, that's pretty much in the middle, but that they produce more in Placid. There's a couple marketplaces there. I'm thinking of Stackman and I have to look at a map. I forgot the other areas. Orville. I think that was the main one. That's a nice area, Placid, and there's always a lot of production in that area. So, yeah, we hear that Dodixie thinks LB. We hear that Dodixie is making a comeback as far as a strong trade hub. For a long time, it was a number 2, number 3 trade hub, and actually number 3. It was never number 2, but it really fell off for a while, and it seems to be making a comeback. There are people who are actively trying to trade inside of Dodixie, but we don't know if that's enough to bring it back. But it has shown some crazy signs of life recently. Okay, let's move on.
Well, Ashtarothi and his group is pretty much trying to revive Dodixie, but it's going to be a bit of an uphill struggle until we get some changes from CCP to help on it.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of trade, we're moving on to market trade value by region. And what we see in this first graph, and we're going to get to a second graph that'll show more detail, but this first graph just shows you how dominant trade is in JITA, mostly the Forge and maybe Perimeter, where the Tranquility Trade Tower is. That's a player-owned station. And it's well over 500 trillion. It's just...
This is also why I'm predicting
impossible.
There's going to be something happening, because if, or rather when, say the production numbers that you already looked at, which is also dominant in the Forge, but also the trade moves to player-owned structures, at least for anything that's not retail, those numbers are going to be huge. And a lot of that is most likely going to be, well, maybe not monopolized, but it's definitely going to be one of the major players is going to be the TTT Tower, right? And that means that they're going to get the percentages of those exchanges. So say 2% of that, of half of that total value, that's a lot. That's going to be a lot of money.
Yeah. And that's owned by Test, and Test gives payoffs to Horde and Goon Swarm and other groups. So everybody gets a little bit of that profit that's collected through taxes from players trading mostly RMT type stuff, like Plex, like RMT is real money transactions, but Plex is bought with real money. So is injectors are kind of tied to Plex and so on. So those are the kinds of things that sell for a lot of money per individual item. And
that started dominating because of the tax evasion, so to speak, right? Yeah. So that's why that moved onto those platforms. But eventually, offshoring. But I'm eventually expecting that more and more of the real market will also move onto these stations. You're already seeing that if you want to trade in things like minerals, you might actually be better off trading in TTT because the prices are competitive and so are the fees. So I would definitely expect to see a lot more happening on that in that market. And I'm really hoping that at some point Test will release at least some of the numbers, not necessarily specific detail numbers, but just I would love them to tell us when they break even and make more on non-Plex stuff than on Plex stuff. That would just be amazing if they would.
I don't know if they ever will, but yeah. So somebody asks here, well, Gladius88 says, which tower, which system, which location? And so it is the system of Perimeter. It is in the region of Forge. It is next door to JITA. In that system, you will see a Keepstar, the only one built in HiSec. And it was my Keepstar, but I sold it to Test. Test put it up in perimeter, and they called it the Tranquility Trade Towers.
Yeah, and they have two supporting structures as well. I don't know if they're both Sotios, but I'm pretty sure that at least one of them. So you also have you have that three structures network that they pretty much have running in perimeter.
Right. So yeah, the Forge just dominates. So we need a better slide for the other ones. By the way, you can look at Domain compared to Forge. Domain gets to be about less than 1/10 what the Forge is, just to give you an idea of what second place looks like. And
Well,
then
then the next graph is
yeah,
excluding the Forge, so that's really nice.
right. But I wanted to point out that the Forge is just way ahead of everybody else, 10 times more than anybody else. So let's go to the next slide. And here we go. If you take out the Forge, you can see this graph with a little more detail, a little more information to be achieved here. You have Domain at, I don't know, it's over 40 trillion, close to 50 trillion. The next system is Dodixie, which to me is great. It beat out Delve at 20 trillion. So it's about half as big as Domain. Domain is 1/10 the size of Forge, just to give you all that. And then Delve is very close to Dodixie, which is really good because Delve, again, is a player-controlled region. So.
And this is again mainly because so little. Well, there is still a lot that hits the market, and it's most likely primarily in contracts. But in Dell, a lot of it's done internally. It never reaches the actual public market that can be measured because you're doing your reactions and then you're finishing most of the stuff and then you're shipping most of it out and the rest you're using to produce. And then that also never really gets anywhere except it ends up handed over to the people that need it. So yeah, it's lower than the actual economic activity that is going on in Dell.
Yeah. Again, we're talking about trade here. So Sync Liaison, I think, is one of the stories of the day of last month is how in the world are they getting their mojo back in such a strong way? Because they've always been a distant third place, and then behind Dodixie is usually the Minmatar areas, which would be two trade hubs, which in the old days was Rennes. God, Rennes. I love that name. Rennes was the old trade hub. It got displaced by a different Minmatar trade hub called Heck, which was closer to Jita and Dodixie. And so both those together used to equal Sync Liaison. But now I think if you put those two together, they're not close to Sync Liaison anymore, or Dodixie is the main system in Sync Liaison.
All the trade hubs pretty much died, right? And you're just being nostalgic. But you're right; they will actually potentially come back when it becomes viable again. Because back then, when what you're talking about is back when there was almost like I would say there was 5 major trade hubs, and you could really benefit from doing some serious arbitrage trade between them, but that died.
Yeah, it was sad. I think there was a lot more supply lines to regions because people were running missions in regions, and that was a big part of earning income. And then maybe that shifted to earning income in Empire Space became completely inferior to earning it in nullsec. So
it's also about risk and reward, right? You can, when you do something like arbitrage and you try to ship things out to service at secondary and tertiary hubs, right? What you're doing is every single time you send out materials to then trade, you're taking a risk. Of course, you can use PushX and Red Frog and all that, but it's just also a lot of hassle and handling collaterals and the whole risk thing. And then, or if you do it yourself, then if you get blown up, then you are pretty much losing everything that was in that shipment. And you have to have a certain scale. You need to be at a certain level of operation before it's actually worth it. And back then, there were more operators like this around. Of course, one of the big ones was Rita Jeter, which basically, I think, Reader Jeter had something like maybe 40, maybe 50% of the actual arbitrage market to the trade hubs. And Reader could lose the entire shipments of an entire day, and it wouldn't make a dent in his
I,
operations, right?
I, I still don't know what you guys mean by arbitrage. Like, just not that
It's
savvy.
it's fixing prices, right? It's basically if there's a price difference between one location and another, you fulfill it and you take the profit, right? That's pretty much what arbitrage is about. Usually, you then do that by using stock control and making sure that you're just resupplying your store and your stockpiles. But it's also about going very fast to take advantage of a massive shortage, right? So if something gets bought out entirely and someone is trying to do a manipulation, you pretty much get your stacks and then just ship it out there.
Okay, question again from Gladius88. Thanks for all these great questions. Where do people of nullsec send their stuff to trade if the shift went from high sec to low sec missioning? That's a couple. Do you want to answer that? You want me to?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
Where do people of nullsec send their stuff to trade?
Well, they send most of their stuff to Jita.
Well,
We just
yeah, let's just make that clear. What happens is that people will do missions, or they'll actually do a lot of ratting, NPC stuff, collect a bunch of things. If they're doing specialized anomalies or sites, basically, they'll end up getting some valuable modules. And even if they don't get valuable modules, they may get just a ton of junk modules. And they'll take all that stuff and they'll ship it to the major trade hub, which in this case is Jita, because they want to just liquidate it. So they just sell it there.
And this is simply because it's a lot of a hassle and it's really difficult to mature a secondary hub because you will never reach proper parity and coverage of items. So some items you might not actually be able to sell at a secondary hub because no one is really interested in buying it. Or the people that are buying it at bullshit prices, which are so low that it's completely going to cut into your profits. So everyone just goes to Jita because everything can be sold and everything can be bought there. That coverage is just not there elsewhere yet.
Yeah. There's not enough buyers, so your stuff might sit too long, and really you just want the cash. So you go to the place where it sells fast. It'll sell for less, but you don't care. You just want to get rid of it. And that's what has been the nature of trade for a long time. Before that, it was more regionalized as people did missions and needed supplies in different areas of the game. And again, there are four major empires. There are more than that, but there are four major empires. And that's where you saw the trade hubs. One was for Kaldari space, one was for Amarian space, one was for Galente space, and one was for Minmatar space. Actually, had two in Minmatar space, as we said.
Also, hi, Willie. I was just prophesying about how rich you're going to be in the future.
Why? How do you between the TTT? You mean?
Yeah.
Why? How does it benefit the TTT?
Because a lot of economic activity is going to move on to TTT because it's pretty much going to end up having maybe not monopoly but very close.
Why?
If we get anything remotely useful from industry changes, you will move all their activity onto play-on structures, which will mean TTT.
Oh, you guys are talking about theoretical changes, not the stuff that was announced today?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Maybe.
We'll see how rich you get. All right. But right now you're doing okay with the trading tower?
Yeah, the trading tower makes good money.
So, Billy...
I was actually asking if at any point normal items exceeds the profits from Plex, would you be willing to actually announce that date?
We don't know that. Like when you get the data, it just shows you. Am I on the character? No. It literally just shows you market order, commission fee, or whatever. It doesn't tell you if it was a normal item or a Plex item or whatever. Any data in terms of what is being sold would have to be from people analyzing the market over tens of thousands of items, which is significantly more statistical analysis than we're doing. So.
Well, I've heard from people that do that kind of work and have for a long time worked, I think for 2 or 3 years, worked in that area that most of the money is RMT related items like Plex, and that may have shifted now, but that's what it was at least 6 months ago.
RMT related items, aka real trade, or
Yeah.
real money related items.
Yeah, there's illicit RMT, which we're not talking about, but we're talking about the.
I know, it's just like when people throw a negative connotation on something, it's.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. I wanted to look at other marketplaces just to give you an idea. There's some texture to EVE Online's marketplaces, and I'll point out some systems.
So did you guys already talk about the patch, or?
Right now we're on MER, the monthly economic report. We haven't talked about the patch. Well, we did a few days ago.
The stuff that was announced like 30 minutes ago.
No, we haven't seen that. We were talking.
We did this.
Boy.
Give me a link to that. We'll get to that next. We'll move along here.
Just look on Reddit. It's always there waiting for you.
I prefer when people paste it into TIS, but
it's in EVE Online chat in the TIS channel.
Thank you. Okay, let's finish up here, Caleb. So other trade hubs that I like and wanted to point out is, again, Placid. I think that's a good area if you want to set up shop and play a little bit in LowSec and even have good access to Syndicate that is nullsec, that is NPC nullsec, which is nobody can own, but there's incredibly dangerous out there, but also incredibly lucrative. That's a good place to set up shop, Placid, and I would suggest near Stackman. Another place I liked a lot is Devoid. That is right on the border of Providence. So you have all the. Go ahead. Who's sighing? All right.
It might have been me, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Don't worry. So Devoid, I think, is a neat area because you have access to Providence, which is nullsec, but it's close to Rennes. It's between Rennes and Amari and markets. So there's kind of a dead zone there that I think there's one little market there that's kind of grown. I don't know where it's at now. It might be dead by now. But you can bring supply. You can sell supplies to people in Providence, and there's a lot of people in Providence. And you can resupply from Amar or Rennes if you wanted to. I always thought that was a neat little area. That is Devoid region. And then there's Iridia, which is incredibly dangerous for trading, but there's a lot of PvP activity there. Iridia has always been very dangerous. Okay, so those are some of the systems I wanted to point out, some of the regions that I wanted to point out. Let's move on. Contracts. Is there anything to contracts, Caleb?
No, and I'm reading the mineral distribution update. That's very interesting.
Okay, you read up, and then we'll talk about that next. This is funny. Pravi have no ISK. They sell all their ISK to test for protection. I don't think that's true, but whatever.
Yeah, I can pretty safely say we don't get paid nothing.
What is? Pravi. But it does. Okay, so you're the leader of TEST, which is the leader of the Legacy Coalition. What's your relationship with Providence?
Pravi is just kind of the good guys. They're that scrappy little kid in the neighborhood that gets beat up all the time, and you just want to go help them because they're so like disheveled and stuff. Like they're the good guy. If there's anybody that's the good guy in EVE, it's Pravi, and that just kind of naturally makes you want to help them.
Yeah.
Lamar Victor.
Okay, let's finish up here. The service fee breakdown. No, there's probably something to be seen here, but we need a trader to look at it. Yeah, I don't see anything. All right, the top sinks. Bounty prizes are up. That's actually what got killed. What got killed in blackout days we were talking about earlier. So last summer and last year, they made a change that made knowing who was in the system with you hard to know unless somebody spoke. They didn't appear on your radar, basically. That meant that you could be ambushed at any time, and that just really killed the NPC ratting efforts. You can see that massive drop in August and September down to like 4 trillion when it really was at about 2 trillion. it was at about 2.2 trillion, and it dropped to about 0.4 trillion. So drop of about 400%. It has bounced back since that was lifted, since that mechanic was changed. Now you can see who's in the system with you, even if you're in nullsec. And those bounty prizes have jumped up last month pretty strongly from what looks like a 1.4 trillion to 1.8 trillion, almost 2 trillion. And that is probably the efforts of OASA just going nuts on NPCing. Everything else looks pretty stable except transaction tax appear to be down. Well,
I just would love to see that bounty thing go back into a low dip.
To squeeze money out of the economy.
Yeah, it's just I don't think it's a good idea to print money into the economy with bounties so massively. I think there should be better sources for generating it.
Well, we know that the best source of money leaving the game is players that have a lot of money essentially not logging in and staying out of the game. Now, that can always be reactivated, but that's how the majority of money leaves the game, is people who quit with all their wealth. Okay, so let's go on. We'll get to your favorite one in a second. Money supply. This isn't velocity, but why do they have money supply and velocity? What's the difference? Do you know?
Money supply is how frequently ISK is moving through the different different systems in the game. So every time money changes hands, that adds to the velocity of ISK. This is just how much money is getting printed and goes into the system.
Well, it looks like character. So they have this divided between character, corporation, and then total. So you can see the difference. The lower red line that barely goes above 200 trillion is the corporation's wealth. If you look at the player's wealth, that has been going up since 2015 pretty steadily, with only a small decline again last summer.
Again, it's because it's a risk to have money in corporate accounts, right? If you have it in a corporation account, someone can go in there and steal it. So it's just much safer to compartmentalize it by having it on character hands. Most people do that. The majority of the wealth will be on the individuals, and then they will move money into the organization as needed and pay out from that. It's simply because it's too dumb to have massive wealth on corporate accounts.
Corporate, you assume that many people can access corporate money depending on the permissions and how it's set up. But so any one person that gets disgruntled can reach in, grab all the money, and take off like the judge did for CO2. Speaking of GigX, who's hanging out with us in station here.
My guess is that of those corporation wallet amounts, I would say that maybe up to at least 75% is very small corps and one-man corp wallets, because they're using corporation wallets for every operation they do. I don't think it's going to be the big organizations.
It's interesting. Corporate wallets didn't take any kind of a hit during blackout, but you can see that personal wealth from characters went down quite a bit. I would say about 1,000 trillion. I don't know what that is in math terms. But you can see characters, the character wealth is about, say, 80%, 90% of the, more like 80% of the total wealth in the game is on characters, not in corporations. So it's not communal, it's individual. Let's move on. And here is finally the velocity of ISK. It's a different color this time. It's usually gold. This time it's blue. Velocity of ISK is, as Caleb described, the changing hands of money. So how much money is moving through transactions. It gives you an idea of the health of the economy. You want this to be high.
High. Because it's also kind of when it moves from player to player, this is one of my pet peeves, right? I would like to see a lot more of the activity being primarily player to player and get rid of these kiddie stuff where it's NPCs on the faucet side and the sink side. I think we need to get rid of that, and the velocity of ISK will go up tremendously. if you start seeing things like the trade of key to actually move on to player-owned structures, because that means that a lot of that money, especially the fees and stuff, will go into the hands of actual players, and then they will be reutilized to actually go into the hands of other players again, and other players again, and so on and so forth. And that's going to increase the velocity of this.
You see, something happened here in February where, actually, I'm having trouble reading this. So February, each line indicates the beginning of the month, not the end, I assume. So if that's the case, something happened here at the beginning of February that made that jump up quite a bit.
Yeah, the exact details of why that jump is up, I don't even know.
I can imagine that it has to do with maybe the Northern War ending pretty much around that time. Again, then you have real world circumstances like the people staying home a lot more because of the real world virus. Who knows? But probably has to do with the ending of Dead Coalition.
And the entirety of chat seem to be trying to trigger Billy right now.
That'll be that. Listen, I take responsibility for.
Yeah, you are responsible for that one.
I take responsibility for making sure people don't get trolled.
If you think that's trolling me here,
I think you're fine with it, but I still think it's our responsibility.
I wouldn't worry too much about it.
All right, good. We don't want you not to come around because people are trolling you out. All right.
I don't think I've been trolled at anything since 2007. So.
Oh, what happened in 2007?
Oh, the Kugu forums, man, they were tough when I was a youngster, and I hadn't built up the thick skin you get over the years of people in EVE Online calling you mean names.
Kugutsumen forums. Oh my God, you got trolled out by those? Those were bad, real bad.
Now Willy is in his vibranium full suit.
Well, I mean, after literally a decade of people saying mean things to you on the internet, it just doesn't have quite the same effect it used to have. Let's say, age and caring goes away.
Yeah, the whole resilience thing that Ghost likes to talk about. You are like the poster boy. The skin is so thick that nothing touches you anymore. It's the same with Sword Dragons. Like nothing touches it.
All right, this is good stuff for you to look at, economic indices, but we will skip this for now because this tells the whole story of economics in EVE Online.
Nitpicking. Skip it.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's get to the important stuff. Go and pull up that dev blog, please.
Okay, let's go to dev blog. Actually, we're going to stop, close up the economic report. We'll start again. Stick with us. We'll be right back.